Hello, welcome to the second video. And I'm starting this whole course off talking about mindset because the biggest thing when you're talking about success, when you're talking about financial stability, whether you're talking about relationships, whatever you're talking about, you have to have the proper mindset and understanding the mindset and how you create things and how you bring things to reality, manifest them is really important. And I'm not talking about manifest like you sit around and meditate and poof, something appears. I'm talking about the mindset that brings you, people called Kobe, the Mamba mentality, or, the intensity, or the things that people have that makes them become who they are. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in these first couple of videos. So this first video, I want to talk about something called the paradox of the heap. And when I was in college, I was a philosophy major, and I ended up double majoring in philosophy and economics because my parents told me, "We're not sending you to college to learn how to think. What are you going to do with just a philosophy major?" So we want you to pick something else up. So I didn't want to drop philosophy, so I just double majored in philosophy and economics. So one of the things, but in my intro to philosophy class, we learned about paradoxes, and one of the people we learned about is Zeno. And Zeno had a number of paradoxes, and one of the paradoxes that I learned about was called the paradox of the heap. And the paradox of the heap simply means, if you don't know what a paradox is, it's two things can be correct that seem to be in antithesis of each other or shouldn't be correct, right? But so it becomes a paradox. So you'll see here in a second when I explain the paradox of the heap. So the way the paradox of the heap works is that if you have one grain of sand, right, do you have a heap of sand? And the answer, of course, is no. That's just one grain of sand. If you add one grain of sand, will you have a a heap of sand? And the answer, of course, is no. You just have two grains of sand. So logically, adding one grain of sand, you've just established that adding one single grain of sand will not give you a heap of sand. Right? So if you add a third grain of sand, you still don't have a heap. If you add a fourth grain of sand, you still don't have a heap. But as we all know, if you continue doing this, eventually you will have a heap of sand. Right? You'll have a bunch. Now, whenever you look at a sand, a heap of sand, right, just a pile, let's say, you can call it the paradox of the pile if you want to. If you look at the heap of sand and say, okay, let me remove one grain of sand, you also don't destroy. You would still be correct in saying I have a heap of sand. So the concept of when does it become a heap? What happens? How does it become something more than just a number of grains of sand, right? Because there's no definition for these things, but we know it happens and it occurs. So this paradox saying that, one grain of sand will never equal a heap. However, you do actually end up with a heap. This paradox relates to you as a person. It relates to you on how you define yourself, your identity, right? Because whatever you do one thing of will not make you the definition of that thing, right? So, for example, if I go for a run today, and I've never run in my life, but I go for a mile jog, does that make me a runner? No, it means I ran one day. But what if I do it tomorrow? What if I went out to my friend and I said, I'm a runner? And they said, really? How much do you run every day? I go, yeah, last 2 days. They would be like, well, you're not really a runner. You just ran for 2 days, right? So, but eventually, if I did it for a third day, a fourth day, a week, 2 weeks, there's no actual day, but eventually my identity would be, I am a runner. I run every day. Not one particular day would do that. Same thing with all actions, all definitions, all identity. There's not $1 that makes you rich, right? So if I have $1,000,000, am I rich? If I have $999,999, am I rich? Well, both are. But there's at some point one of these you become rich from a dollar, right? So it's the understanding of we just don't know which one it is. And this happens as far as relationships go. We know when you go on your first date, you shouldn't be like, wow, this is the person, and ask them to marry you. And we also know that if you're dating this person, this is from Simon Sinek, by the way. If you're dating the person for 10 years, you should be able to understand that you're in love, where you can get married, right? So we don't know what day is the right day or when it is. We just know when it's too early, like one heap, two pieces of sand, and when it's too late. Right? It's like when we know before it reaches the size of Mount Everest, that it's a heap of sand, right? So somewhere in between, we can determine these things. And so we understand at some point you become a runner. At some point you become rich. At some point you should get married, right? If you've been together for this amount of time, right? So, or it's okay to ask uh, the other person if you become married. So what the point of this is saying is that the collective of doing all the things, the collective grains of sand, create something more than just the individual action. And this is what we're going to talk a lot about as we go through this course. That even though you do something small, like add a grain of sand, right? And this is what I talk about my daily, when we get into the daily disciplines, the things that I repeat that seem small, right? And this is where my phrase I'm going to talk about is 1 + 1 = 3. Right. So even though it seems small, even though it seems insignificant, even if it's like doing one thing repeatedly over and over and over again, will give you identity, will change who you are. This will also, you'll see this happening. And by the way, this is not a law or something that I have come up with. This is a universal law. This is what compounding interest is. It's like you take a small amounts of compounding interest and you can go from very small to very big very quickly. And each time, each decision, each discipline that you repeat creates your identity and makes you something more than the sum of all the parts. And so this is why 1 + 1 = 3 in this idea, in this concept. So the idea of practicing daily disciplines will get you there. And this is also the importance of why aligning with other people with similar objectives as you, will also create more synergy, more better results, will create something bigger. When people come together, it's not just one or two people, it's 1 + 1 = 3. You come up with better ideas together. Working together, people have done this all the time. The greatest things on earth have been created by teams, right? Teams of people coming together with a similar desire, a similar objective, and they create something even better than they could be themselves. And so this is what we're creating here with Bright Futures. So that's it for your first video. Understand the paradox of the heap, and you'll see more about this, about the small grains of sand, the one actions. The accumulation of actions will create large effects in your life and change your identity, make you who you are based upon those actions. And by the way, those actions are not just additions, they're also subtractions, right? If you do the poor things every single day, if you eat poorly forever, you go in that direction, right? So that's just how it goes. And it's never a one-time thing. It is an accumulation of either thoughts, actions that make you who you are. And the great thing is, if your identity is not where you want it to be, you can start changing today. You can make different choices and you will get to a different result. So remember that paradox of the heap, and we'll be talking about that a lot more as we go through the course.